Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another forecast discussion. Haven't done one of these in a little bit here, but there is a little bit of an interesting setup for parts of the upper Midwest today. We have a couple of slight risk areas as outlined by the SPC. This first one, the northernmost one, is up here, encompassing parts of central to north central Minnesota, with the second one down here to the south, just to the east of the Omaha, Lincoln, Nebraska area, including the Des Moines, Iowa area. So a couple of slight risk areas here for today. Both of these areas will feature a tornado threat, with the northern slight risk featuring a little bit greater of a tornado threat, 5% up there, with just a 2% there down to the south. Damaging winds and large hail will be a threat as well. As I said, haven't done one of these forecast discussions in a while, but should see the active weather start to ramp up again as we get kind of into that secondary fall season for severe weather across the plains into the Midwest. So let's go ahead and get started here. Let's take a look at the water vapor satellite imagery here. A couple things you can notice right off the bat here. Large area of convection ongoing from far northeast Kansas, eastern Nebraska into northwest Missouri, and parts of Iowa here. And if we look at our radar image, you can see exactly what we're talking about here. Here's Omaha, here's Des Moines. You can see to the south and of Omaha, southwest of Des Moines, very large area of showers and embedded thunderstorms here across that region, extending all the way back into far northeast Kansas here, up into northwest Missouri and southern Iowa. This is going to play a role in the rate of destabilization for this southern mode of severe weather today. We're going to have to watch this to see how quickly this moves out and how the atmosphere reacts behind this system here. Because the longer this system takes to move out, the later it's going to be for initiation here in the southern zone. We're going to have to watch how much that instability is sapped by this early convection. Another thing we can notice here, we have a nice little swirly here in the flow here across the Dakotas here that's going to move east, and that's going to really play a major role in the severe weather threat today, particularly across this northern slight risk area across central to northern Minnesota. But you can see we have mostly kind of just this broad sort of westerly flow, west-southwesterly flow across the continental U.S. Not really seeing any big troughs here. Except this one, you can kind of see it nudge in here across the Pacific Northwest. If we can zoom out here, if we take a look, let's see if we can take a look here at the continental sector, you are going to see a pretty big trough here across the west coast. Big old trough here across the west coast. This system kind of was up near Alaska, and this is going to dig down off the west coast over the next couple of days and just kind of park itself here across just off the west coast here, likely bringing some rain into parts of California, the Great Basin region, into Arizona and New Mexico over the next several days in the upcoming week. Here, but that's not going to be a player here. Just wanted to kind of have you feast your eyes on this brute of a system here across the southwest. But back here to our area, you can see here, you can even see on our visible satellite image a nice little swirl in the low-level clouds here across basically southern to central North Dakota. This is that evidence of that kind of surface low that we'll talk about in a second, associated with this little shortwave trough that is going to move off toward the east and northeast today, affecting parts of eastern or central and northern Minnesota. You can also see this large area of showers and thunderstorms. It is putting out an outflow boundary here. You can see these kind of waves here emanating, these cloud streets emanating out the southern side of this system. It is pushing out outflow. We'll likely see renewed storm development here along and behind this outflow boundary throughout the morning hours. But again, this complex is expected to move off toward the east and dissipate as the day goes on. So our overall pattern here, we'll take a look at 500 millibars first, so about 18,000 feet here. And you can see what we saw on our satellite imagery. Basically, just a broad zonal flow across most of the CONUS, with the exception here of our kind of leftover sort of remnant troughiness and our kind of new trough that is digging down from the Alaska area. So some remnant troughiness here across the west coast. You can see tons of little embedded shortwaves here as well across the central and northern part of the U.S. And we'll go down to 700 millibars here in a second, but you can kind of see this little wave that we were talking about here across the Dakotas, A little bit of a belt of enhanced flow here across Nebraska into southern South Dakota. That is likely helping to fuel, a little bit of a shortwave here, likely helping to fuel this early convection this morning. If we go to 300 millibars, actually, you can see a little bit better kind of the broad overall flow here. And you can see some nice defluence aloft here across the Dakotas. Again, defluence is that kind of spreading apart of the wind vectors aloft. And when you have that kind of spreading apart of the wind vectors aloft, that creates a void, and you get rising air to help fill that void. And we need rising air for storms. So we want to see this defluence aloft for storms, and this is going to translate east here across the eastern Dakotas into Minnesota this afternoon. Little area of defluence as well here across basically southeast Nebraska through northern Missouri, southern Iowa, also helping to promote rising motion to keep these early storms going across southern Iowa into northwest Missouri, far northeast Kansas. Let's go down to 700 millibars here, pick out some short waves here. You can see a lot of different little kinks here in the flow. This is kind of our most notable one associated with that little swirl we saw on the water vapor satellite image. So our kind of main shortwave here that is it kind of extends all the way down here. You could argue little kinks that extends all the way down here into the southern plains here. So this is going to help. This is going to move off to the east and help create a little bit of lift, a little bit of vorticity, a little spin in the atmosphere out ahead of it as it moves off to the east. You can see it's a little bit more defined here farther to the north. So we should get a little bit more spin in the atmosphere, so to speak, here across that northern slight risk area. That's why the severe threat is just a little bit greater up here in that central to northern Minnesota area. But you can see no shortage of shortwave, no shortage of that semblance of shortwave down here across the southern portion. This little shortwave here is going to move off toward the east and northeast as well, and that should help initiate storms here this afternoon across into the early evening across southeast Nebraska into maybe far northeast Kansas, northwest Missouri, into southern Iowa in that southern slight risk area. So a bunch of little shortwaves moving through. And this is our 850 millibar chart. You can see that semblance of that nocturnal low-level jet still remaining here across the southern plains, as is typical during the spring and summer months. Not much of an extension of that low-level jet into the northern plains. We don't really have a very strong, well-defined surface low out here, as we would see in kind of April and May out here somewhere in Colorado, to really help focus that mass response and really back those low-level winds back and increase those low-level winds as manifest in that low-level jet here at 850 millibars. But we do have some semblance of 850 millibar flow here. That should stick around through the day. As we will have this kind of surface low development here. This kind of broad, you can kind of see broad sort of cyclonic flow here, maybe centered up here somewhere in Canada. That should help keep the winds a little bit strong, but again, not expecting a whole load of cyclogenesis here throughout the afternoon, because we don't have that nice trough traversing the Rockies, that nice westerly flow traversing the Rockies, and attendantly cyclogenesis here on the east side of the Rockies. So the level jet maybe will decrease throughout the day a little bit. Should have some semblance of it throughout the day, though, as we go on in the afternoon and evening hours. We'll take a look at our surface map here, and we'll look at our surface data here in a second. But this is kind of our analyzed surface map here. You can see a couple different low centers here. The first one is that's kind of that low we saw, that swirl in the low-level clouds on the visible satellite. Up here into the Dakotas, that's our northern surface low up in here, centered somewhere right now, basically near Aberdeen, South Dakota, give or take a little bit. Again, this will kind of sit here, maybe move off a little bit to the east as we go throughout the day, and continue to help those winds back out ahead of that surface low. Again, as we know, the low-level wind shear is enhanced, and lift is enhanced just on the eastern northeast side of that surface low. So your most favorable wind shear for tornadoes is going to be just on the northeast side of that surface low, coincident with where that slight risk area and that 5% tornado risk area is as well. Secondary surface low down here across basically west central Kansas here, kind of the just to the east, southeast of Goodland there in western Kansas. This is going to actually, as we said, we're not going to get these surface lows to kind of kind of fortify themselves today because we don't have that lee cyclogenesis factor in place. So these may wash out a little bit throughout the day, but we still should have some surface low, some semblance of surface lows hanging around for this both severe threats here. You can kind of see, we'll take a look at the models in a second, but just a kind of a sneak peek here, you can see as we go throughout the day, we kind of lose that very strong sort of surface low feature, and we don't really have that well-defined surface low there, especially with really in both areas there, but we do have kind of that broad cyclonic flow at the surface up there into central Minnesota, and we have kind of that what appears to be sort of that leftover surface low there to central Kansas, maybe with some sort of a warm front there draped across northeast Kansas into northwest Missouri. So let's look at our surface data here. Let me refresh, make sure this is the most up-to-date data here. So let's take a look here. You can see that cyclonic flow across the Dakotas here. Surface low center somewhere in here. Aberdeen is right in here. So just to the southwest of Aberdeen, South Dakota is where this northern surface low is right now. And then you can also see the cyclonic flow here across basically west central Kansas here, somewhere in this location just west of Russell, maybe along I-70 there. And again, these are going to kind of sit here throughout the day, maybe move a little bit east. Again, we don't have that lee cyclogenesis factor to really enhance and fortify these surface lows throughout the day, but we should have enough of surface flow here out of the southeast to help enhance that tornado threat, especially in the northern situation here. You can see throughout the region, we have basically broad, maybe south-southwest to south-southeasterly flow here. A little more backed here to the north here across Minnesota and Iowa. A little bit more veered here across Missouri here. A little bit more southwesterly flow here across Missouri. A little bit more southeasterly component there across Minnesota. Throughout the region, broad sort of low to mid to upper 60s here, extending all the way up to northern Minnesota down to the south. So moisture shouldn't be too much of an issue, although we are seeing some warming up here through the northern target. So we will have to look at LCL's heights later on, that temperature dew point spread for how favorable is it for tornadoes up here in the northern target. Southern target, we shouldn't have an issue here. Again, we have that complex of storms ongoing right now that is going to help cool temperatures here and kind of sap instability for the time being. Going to need that surface heating throughout the afternoon. It may delay the onset of convection here, this kind of second round of severe convection here for this southern target area. But overall, moisture is decent for this time of year, and we should see a little bit of that represented in the soundings here. Let's start here with our Topeka, Kansas sounding from this morning, 12Z. So 7 a.m. Central Daylight Time here. You can see some instability already. But we don't have a really well-defined moist layer, you could say here. 72 over 59 at 12Z at Topeka. So not a really well-defined moist layer. Often you see your temperature profile here do something like this, and maybe our, dew point does something like this before they kind of diverge here aloft. And this is what we call our moist layer, and that's something we often see during the kind of spring severe weather season. And in any potent severe weather setup, you're going to see a nice mixed layer there, or a nice moist layer there, beneath kind of a drier layer aloft. That creates both instability and a nice layer of moisture near the surface. We're not really seeing that here. And maybe a little bit of a concern as we go throughout the day. We don't really have that strong low-level flow to help continue to import moisture from the south out here across this region. So maybe a little bit of an issue as temperatures warm throughout the day. They may warm into the mid to upper 80s. And if we do that, you have a temperature dew point spread of 85, maybe over, if we do get kind of that moisture to maintain itself, low 60s, that's a little bit on the fringes, a little bit on the margins as far as favorability for tornadic supercells here. Again, kind of that rule of thumb we like to use in kind of the lower terrain, the lower plains, is kind of that 20-degree temperature dew point spread. We're probably going to see a little bit higher than that, especially in the southern target today. Let's take a look at our Omaha sounding here, and again, a little bit more moist throughout the entire column here, but not a huge moist layer here. We do see a little bit higher dew points here across Omaha, this region, 67 over 65 here. Again, if we do get surface heating throughout the afternoon. We will get a little bit of mixing to occur, and this dew point may drop a little bit. So again, you're going to see temperatures maybe in the mid 80s with dew points probably plateauing around the low to mid 60s. So again, that temperature dew point spread going to be a little bit on the fringes for tornadic supercell development here. A little bit of a wonky wind profile here. We do have deep layer shear, 0 to 6 kilometer shear, about 22 knots. That's definitely lower than what we would want to see for supercells. But again, that is expected to increase as that little bit of a trough and an enhanced flow aloft moves to the east today and helps increase that wind shear throughout the day. But winds generally are kind of veering with height here in the lowest levels, so there is a little bit of warm advection ongoing here. So that should help keep dew points pretty steady. Maybe rise a little bit before mixing takes over later in the afternoon. A little bit of drier air aloft here with southern extent, it appears. You go to the north, this may be a little bit of an erroneous reading here. It looks awfully smooth up here. So we could see a little bit of an issue with the balloon, maybe some condensation on the instruments here. But it looks a little bit more moist here throughout the profile at Omaha. If we go up here, let's go to Minneapolis, St. Paul. Very moist, very saturated profile here as we go through the atmosphere. That red line, that temperature profile, and the dew point line very, very close here as you go up in the atmosphere at Minneapolis, St. Paul. We are missing some wind data in here, so I wonder if there was maybe an instrumentation issue here as well. But overall, you can see a fairly moist profile here, a little bit better moist layer here. Not your classic sort of moist layer here, but there is an ample amount of moisture here. If we go back out toward the west, just some of these readings seem a little bit wonky here. So not sure what's going on with the soundings today here. There may be some erroneous readings here, but nonetheless, we can gather some data from these as well. So let's go ahead and look at our model data. This is the 12Z NAM run. So this is the initialization here. You can see that slight enhanced belt to flow here at 500 millibars. Nice shortwave trough here across the central to northern plains. And this is, as we go through the day, as we said, so that's that northern portion you can see is a little bit more well-defined here, a little bit stronger flow here aloft in kind of that northern region, focused on that northern slight risk area. We do still see that belt of enhanced flow creeping into that southern slight risk area as well. This is not any mind-blowing flow that you might see in the plains, 60, 70, 80 knots of flow here. This is nice, moderate, kind of 35 to 40 knots of flow, 45 knots or so across this entire region. So kind of modest flow here at 500 millibars out of the west-southwest as we go throughout the day. And you can kind of see, you can definitely see it's a little bit more well-defined, that shortwave, a little bit more well-defined with northern extent. Let's go down to 700 millibars and take a look at our shortwaves here. And you can definitely see where those shortwaves are aimed. So again, much more well-defined wave here in that northern target. That may help give a little bit more energy there to that northern slight risk area. You can definitely see a shortwave down here to the south as well. A little bit of enhanced flow as well at 700 millibars. So the southern target is not going to see an absence of a shortwave energy down there for sure. 850 millibars, we'll take a look at how that low-level jet evolves throughout the day. You can see that it kind of does wash out throughout the day, builds back in as it usually does nocturnally as we go towards sunset and after. Especially with southern portions of the outlook area, we should see an enhancement of that low-level jet by about 0Z or so, 40 knots or so from southern to central Iowa down into Kansas there. So that may be a little bit of a positive for the southern area as far as tornadic supercells go. Maybe a little bit stronger low-level shear for this southern target. As opposed to the northern target, only 20 knots or so of shear there, of low-level jet there at 850 millibars. Now we'll look at our surface pattern. You can see those two surface lows there in western Kansas and central South Dakota there this morning. And again, those kind of wash out throughout the day. A little bit better semblance of that surface low there across western Minnesota there throughout the day. So that should help, again, to the northeast side of that. That will help back winds, help winds be out of the southeast there, just on the northeast side of that low. A little bit of a warm frontal zone maybe here as well. You can see that pressure tongue there, maybe across central Minnesota. So I would expect on that northern target to be somewhere right in smack dab in central Minnesota there to be kind of the target area for today, wherever that low sets up. You You can see that low kind of washes out in Kansas, but we do have that kind of pressure tongue there, that leftover kind of maybe pseudo warm front there across northeast Kansas there somewhere. And again, you can see cooler temperatures here in the wake of that morning convection. So again, we're going to have to watch that and see, do we get enough destabilization on the backside of that? I do think there is quite a bit of sunshine here on the backside of this storm complex here. So destabilization shouldn't be an issue. This may delay storm initiation toward closer to maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 p.m. even this afternoon. Just going to have to kind of watch that. Whereas we have very nice sun starting to show up here across the Minnesota risk area. So storms should definitely start earlier there in that northern target as opposed to that southern target. It's going to take a little bit longer to destabilize there. So right on that warm frontal zone is going to be your favored location for severe storm development this afternoon. Dew points here, again, shouldn't be too much of an issue here. We see nice low to mid 60s here, and I think the NAM kind of overdoes dew points as well. These may be a little bit high, but nice moisture here across the region. Nice, it does build back in there behind that MCS, that complex of storms this morning. So let's take a couple of soundings here. I'm going to zoom in just so we can get a little bit better. Kind of refine where I want to pick the sounding here. So this is going to be 21Z. I'm going to pick it right in here, right ahead of that surface low in Minnesota. And then we'll pick one out here right along that warm frontal zone, right? Kind of the Nebraska, Missouri, Kansas conflux there. So this is our Minnesota target here. This is at 21Z. So this would be 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time. You can see a nicely destabilized atmosphere. Kind of your classic sort of sounding, classic looking sounding there. A little bit of dry air aloft, nice moist layer there at the surface, does build back in. 66 degrees may be a little bit high, and 80 degrees, again, NAM has that cool bias, so if we do a little bit of adjustment there, say we get up to 84, 85 degrees there, there in central Minnesota, and dew points go down a little bit to the 62, 63 range. That's kind of right on the margins. 20, 21 degrees is kind of right at that upper echelon for your temperature dew point spread for tornadic supercells there. But I definitely think there will be a chance for tornadoes up here. You can see that the hodograph, not a whole lot of turning in the lowest levels, not a lot of curvature in that hodograph. We do get an enhancement of shear. Longer hodographs here as that shortwave moves in, stronger winds aloft move in. Just not a lot of curvature there in the low levels. Going to really have to find that shortwave. And let me go back here and really try to pick right out ahead of that shortwave, or that surface low. See if that makes a difference. So we'll get this to load here. This is going to be, and you just don't see a lot of curvature here on the NAM in this situation here. Not a lot of low-level shear to speak of here. That is a little bit different down in Kansas. Again, we're going to see this may be a little bit farther south, but you can see a lot of turning in the lowest kind of 3 kilometers there. Nice turning in the low levels. 0 to 1 kilometer SRH is only at 78, so not a ton of turning in the lowest kilometer here, but the overall turning in the lowest levels is very, very good here. So supercells definitely on the table here for this southern mode. Nicely destabilized, a little bit of a cap remaining here. That may be some semblance of that early storms, although this is a little bit farther southwest of those early storms. 91 over 67 here. Again, that's a little bit high, a little bit warm relative to that dew point for tornadic supercells here. Let me take one at 21Z here across southwest Iowa. Let me go a little bit farther north here and see what we see as far as destabilization goes. We should see cooler temperatures up here. This area was influenced more by this early storm. You can see a lot more curvature there in the low levels. A lot more influence of that low-level jet, as we saw on the NAM here. And we've destabilized here, 79 over 69. So I think 69 is going to be a little bit high. We may get some evapotranspiration from the crops up there. But it is September. It's hard to say, but this would be much more in that favorable zone for tornadic supercells here. And this hodograph is very, very nice looking. Lots of curvature in the low levels there. Lots of low-level shear. Approaching 500 meters squared per second squared effective SRH there. So there is a chance for tornadic supercells down here. Just going to have to come down to storm mode You can see overall bulk shear is not that high. Our overall hodograph is not super long here. Only 27 knots of effective bulk shear here. So that is really on the margins here. I'd like to see that above 30 to 35. So we may get to see more of a multi-cell mode here, maybe a mix of multi-cells with some transient supercells up here. And that may temper the overall kind of tornado threat here with more of a multi-cell mode given weaker bulk shear with this southern target. So let's go here. Let's go to 0Z. That was at 0Z. So let's go ahead and look here. Central Minnesota here at 0Z. See if anything improves. See if that low-level shear improves here, at least on this NAM run. And you can see it really doesn't. We have decent instability here, just not a lot of curvature in that low-level hodograph, not a lot of low-level shear. And that may hinder the tornado threat up there. Again, you don't really see that tight surface low that we would like to see here. You do see some cyclonic flow here, but we don't really have that really strongly backed winds out of the southeast. That might help enhance that low-level shear, enhance the tornado threat up here across central to northern Minnesota today. Let's go a little bit farther north where those winds are a little bit more out of the east. See, we're not looking far enough north here. Just kind of see a little bit better curvature here, but again, not a ton here in the low levels, not a lot of speed shear here in the low levels, very unidirectional flow aloft. There is a little bit more bulk shear here, so I do think supercells are a greater possibility here in the northern target as opposed to that southern target. Just not quite sure on the tornado threat. There is 135 effective inflow layer SRH there, very marginal for tornadic supercells there, but definitely needs to be watched. Definitely is a threat. Decent instability, some steeper lapse rates aloft here, some adequate lapse rates aloft here should foster somewhat of a large hail threat with storms today. And I think especially with the southern mode where storms will be much more clustered, more multicellular, damaging winds may be a little bit more of a threat down here in that southern target given how messy and kind of clustered they will be. Large hail will be a threat as well, steeper lapse rates down here, a little bit more instability here on the NAM. So large hail may be a little bit more of a threat here, at least in the early convective life cycle with this southern target. Finally, let's go to some convective allowing model data. Again, take these with a grain of salt. This is the 12Z HRRR. You can see that convection ongoing in southwest Iowa there. Dissipates throughout the day. And you can see storms start to go 22, 23Z, so about 5, 6 p.m. up here. And I always subtract 1 or 2 hours from the HRRR, so probably about 3 to 4 p.m. here across north central to central Minnesota here. These will be supercells. Again, not sure about the tornado threat. We don't really see a ton of curvature there in the hodographs, and you can see here that storms are holding off in this southern target area, still waiting for that full destabilization. Then by 0Z, 7 p.m., we do get storms to fire here. And again, you can just see it's very, very messy, very clustered, very messy mode down here into Iowa. Do see some semblance of maybe some supercells in here. And I think this will be a mix of multicells and supercells, maybe mostly multicells down here. So mostly a large hail and damaging wind threat with an outside chance for a tornado or two down here, given the strong low-level shear in some of those hodographs down here, stronger low-level jet influence down here in the southern target. Northern target, we do see a little bit more of an isolated supercell mode, more kind of just isolated supercells here, semi-discrete supercells. So that may increase the tornado threat. We'll see if we get a little bit more curvature in the hodographs, a little bit more low-level shear than is predicted. That may increase the tornado threat as well. Let's take a look at the HRRR sounding. You can see much of the same, just not a ton of curvature in the low levels. There is a little bit, 127 effective SRH there. So there is a little bit of curvature there by 0Z, but just not a ton to speak of. We'll see by 1Z here, maybe a little bit more as we go just after dark, but at the same time, some stability might be trying to build back in there in the low levels that might counteract that. So kind of a balancing act with the tornado threat up there today. I think large hail and damaging wind is going to be more of a threat up there today, but there is an outside chance of a tornado or two just on the northeast side of that surface low across central and north central Minnesota. A couple more cams here, ARW, WRF ARW here. You can see that's those storms dissipate into Iowa. We get some convection there in northern Minnesota. Kind of much of the same here. Very messy clustered mode here into Iowa with We go back a little bit here, more of a kind of supercell mode here into north central Minnesota there. Then finally, we'll look at our NSSL WRF, a final cam here, and you can see more discrete supercell activity here into north central Minnesota with a much more clustered multicellular mode down here in the southern target. So all in all, an interesting setup that we are looking at today. Again, 2 slight risk areas here as of now. One here across central to north central Minnesota, the second one here including the Des Moines area down toward Omaha and far southeast Nebraska there into southwest Iowa. Again, I think this northern mode will feature earlier initiation and a better chance for more discrete convection and more supercellular convection with stronger overall wind shear and a more discrete mode, more supercellular mode, just on the northeast side of that surface low. So where that surface low kind of sets up, the northeast side of that is going to be the favored location for supercells there. Southern mode, we're going to see a little bit more of a delay in the onset of convective initiation there because of our early morning storms that are ongoing this morning. A little bit less shear down here overall in the profile. So storms may be a little bit more multicellular, a little bit more messy, clustered, but there is a lot of low-level shear. So we could see a tornado threat down here as well. But I think, again, damaging winds, maybe some large hail is going to be the main threat down here in this southern mode, with an outside chance of a tornado given such strong low-level shear. So that's all I have for now. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next video.